The billionaire didn't walk into Laurel and Pine like a man used to being noticed. He walked in like a man trying not to be. But when his mother, silver-haired and proud, couldn't hear the hostess's greeting, the whole room felt the silence. Then the shy waitress did something no one expected. She lifted her hands and began to speak in sign. In an instant, the billionaire's polished world cracked open to the language he'd never learned, the mother he'd never truly listened to, and the woman who would quietly teach him how. The lunchtime rush at Laurel and Pine always felt like a low-grade thunderstorm that the staff had trained themselves to walk straight through. Cutlery clinked like rain on glass. Espresso hissed like distant lightning. The cool palette of the dining room, sage walls, matte brass fixtures, the kind of linen that made people sit up straighter, hummed with quiet wealth. The front door opened, and a hush slid through the room so smoothly even the music seemed to listen. The billionaire had arrived, not with a phalanx of assistants or the soft armor of a private dining room, but with a woman on his arm whose gait was careful and whose gray hair was the kind people called silver because it sounded kinder. Adrian Cole was younger in person than the tabloids made him look, or maybe it was that fame added decades like talc on a stage. He wore his charcoal suit like it had been draped on him in a museum. No tie, an open collar, a watch that didn't advertise itself, but would pay most mortgages. Beside him, his mother moved with the slow dignity of someone who had made peace with certain aches. She paused to take in the room. Her eyes were bright and alert, reading faces the way other people read voices. The hostess smiled and said, "Welcome," in that polished way the front-of-house people spent years perfecting. Adrian turned toward his mother and formed words carefully, enunciating more than usual so she could read his lips. It wasn't unkind. It was just the choreography he'd learned. Gesture, slow mouth, gentle nudge. "That's table 12, whispered Luca, one of the servers, nudging the woman beside him. "Your section, Maya." His whisper held information and warning and opportunity all at once. Every restaurant had its moments where the world poked a head inside. They were never scheduled. The shy waitress blinked once, twice, the way a person does when a new current cuts through the familiar river of a workplace. She pressed her hand to her apron for half a second, as if to remind herself where her body was, then let that hand drop and set her shoulders. Her hair was pinned back in a practical twist, a few rebellious strands tucked behind her ears. She'd worked here 3 months and still looked like she expected to be corrected at any moment. She carried herself like silence was something you could wear. She took water to the table. When she set the glasses down, she made eye contact with the older woman first, not the son. People noticed, though they didn't know what exactly they'd seen. It was the kind of courtesy that doesn't often make it to the surface in rooms like this. The mother watched her hands. There is a way the deaf watch that is not searching for sound but mapping intention. Maya set the napkins gently and then, without drama, lifted her hands into the air and began to speak. Her fingers shaped at a welcome, warm and precise, the way a person writes the first line of a letter they've been thinking about all morning. Her expressions carried inflection. Her shoulders carried tone. American Sign Language flowed out of her in a cadence that seemed to fit the room as naturally as the glassware. "Hello, welcome. I'm Maya. Would you like a printed menu to hold, or shall I sign it for you?" Evelyn Cole didn't merely smile, she lit. It was the kind of brightness more honest than surprise, the kind the body recognizes in an old friend or a mountain peak after weeks of snow. She returned the greeting in quick, elegant sentences that made her wrists look younger. Her movements shot through Maya like an electric relief. People in the nearest booths stopped pretending not to watch. Luca, hovering near the service station, whispered something like "holy" to no one in particular. Adrian Cole stared, for once not aware of how he looked while doing it. "She signs," he said. Not to his mother, but to the air in front of them, like naming it would help him stand under it. His voice had the careful evenness of a man used to having tone weaponized against him. He looked at the waitress with the kind of measuring curiosity he'd usually reserve for a late-stage pitch. Maya signed slowly enough to be read easily, her voice soft as she interpreted herself for the hearing people at the table. "Welcome. I can sign the menu. I can also slow down and repeat for comfort." She added a question directly to Evelyn in sign, turning her head so her expressions were squarely in the older woman's line of sight. It was small and respectful, the angle of her body, the way she waited, the way she didn't append a smiley apology to every sentence like so many hearing folks did when they tried. Evelyn's hands fluttered midair and then came to rest on the edges of the menu as if to anchor herself. She signed back, not just the message, but the music of it. "It has been months since anyone greeted me in my language without making a spectacle of it. Thank you, child, and yes, please, sign the specials. I am indecisive and stubborn. I like to change my mind at least twice." "My mother says it's been months since anyone," Adrian began, but his words trailed off as he realized he was translating the very thing he was hearing in the room. He glanced at Maya, a silent question. Would she keep interpreting? Would she keep holding this bridge open? She nodded once and spoke softly for him, in the quick cadence interpreters learn when they become the conduit for things more important than their own voice. "Mom says it's been months since anyone greeted her in ASL without making a show of it," Maya said, "and yes to the specials. She warns that she is indecisive and stubborn." She smiled once, small, real, and returned to her hands. The room had shifted. It wasn't merely that a billionaire sat there, or that a shy waitress was suddenly a hinge upon which everything rested. It was that a language had entered the space, a language most people treated like a trick at parties or a sad necessity in the waiting rooms. Here, in the cool light of Laurel and pine, ASL sat at a table like it belonged, because it did. Maya didn't ask if she could take their order yet. She signed descriptions as if painting: the rosemary halibut caught 2 days ago, the heirloom tomato salad, the beef braised, until it gave up its pride. She translated the textures, not just the ingredients, because texture is how the body recognizes itself. With each sign, Evelyn's shoulders eased, the fine lines around her mouth softened, and a little color rose in her cheeks. Adrian watched a version of his mother that restaurants almost never got to see. When they ordered, Maya watched for the small cues. The way Evelyn's fingers hesitated over the sign for meat, the way she rubbed her sternum unconsciously after sipping water, the slight release after Maya suggested a dish gentler on a throat that maybe had been irritated by late winter coughs. It was the kind of noticing that comes from loving someone who doesn't fit neatly into the world's default settings. Later, anyone watching might have said the waitress was simply good at her job, but the truth was, this was not a job for her. She had carried this language home and washed it with dishes and tucked it into bed with her, the way you do with anything that keeps your family together. While the appetizers were prepared, conversation began. It wasn't small talk. The presence of hands forces a certain kind of honesty because you can't throw words around, like confetti. Maya stood a few feet back from the table, signs balanced and steady, and interpreted Evelyn's questions with the gentle rhythm of someone who'd had to interpret fights in school hallways and medical instructions in clinics and quiet prayers in the dark. "How is the construction on your building? Are you sleeping? Are you looking up when people speak to you, or still staring at phones? Have you been to the park you used to take me to last spring? It was ordinary in the way the best conversations are, everything contained in nothing." Adrian answered without the slickness that made people accuse him of being a machine. He tended to talk in bullet points because that was the scale of his life. But here, at a table with his mother and a waitress who had unspooled the knots, he spoke in sentences that curved. "I've been tired," he said, and then laughed once, a sound like he didn't expect it. "We closed the Berlin deal last week. There were 3 nights I didn't get home before 2, but I hired another project lead, so I'm trying to be less. He searched for the right sign, glanced at Maya. She waited. Because she wasn't his teacher, and she wasn't his scold. He found it smaller and used it like a question. Evelyn nodded with an affection that said she had been asking him to be smaller for most of his life. They reached the moment that came in all their meals, where Evelyn asked about the foundation. She could not hear the speeches at galas, but she held numbers like seeds in a pocket. She wanted specifics, not posture, her eyes asked. Maya translated. Where are the interpreter programs for hospitals we fund? Where is the line item for captioning at the events I am dragged to? Where is the auditing of the vendor who always claims it's too expensive? When she signed too expensive, her mouth tightened with a memory. And there something happened that turned the gears of the afternoon. It was not the billionaire's fault, at least not the conscious part of him. He answered in the way executives answer when they are used to trusting lieutenants. He said, "The CFO has a handle on that. We moved some of those allocations this quarter to expand the literacy initiative in—" Evelyn's hand cut a shape Maya recognized immediately. Stop. She signed slowly, each phrase like a staccato, insisting on its own gravity. There were letters. I wrote you. There were meetings. I asked to see budgets. The CFO spoke to me as if I were furniture. He said a sentence that Maya translated carefully for tone and content because it mattered. He said, "Tell your mother she can bake cookies for our volunteers if she wants to contribute." Adrian's face drained of something, some air, some persona. He blinked. He wasn't angry yet. He was holding the anger at arm's length like a grenade he refused to drop. Maya stood so still that stillness itself became a sound. You don't rush here. You don't fill. She watched his mouth form words the way a child might hold a broken thing up to the light. "He said that?" he asked, and it was mostly to his mother, but also to the room, to himself, to the way his own structure nested bias like Russian dolls. "Yes," she signed. "And you never came to the meeting. I sat with a notepad and 2 cups of tea going cold and a list of things a foundation should already know. I asked for an interpreter. They told me it wasn't in this year's budget, and then told me it was too hard to find one last minute. So I wrote you the notes. They did not reach you. Perhaps the dog ate them." She smiled the smallest cruel smile a loving mother is allowed. Then she softened and sighed. No one is at fault for not hearing a voice you were never taught to listen for. But you are at fault when you refuse to learn the language everyone else has to adapt to. Adrian's hand went to his jaw. He had been told he had a habit of covering his mouth when he was thinking so other people couldn't guess what was coming next. Now he did it as if trying to feel the weight of his own words before he let them catch fire. Maya spoke in her own voice, again for clarity. "She says she wrote letters you didn't receive. She asked for interpreters, was told it wasn't in the budget, then told it was too late. She came to meetings you missed. She was talked down to by the CFO. She wants the foundation to do what it says on the About page." The appetizers arrived. It felt almost obscene. The food sat for a moment. No one moved. "Would you—" Adrian began, and then stopped. He looked at Maya the way a person looks at a stranger who has just snuck a key into a lock you didn't even know was a door. "Would you stay a little? Be with us for this lunch? I know it's not standard." She glanced at the manager, already watching from the bar. He lifted his chin in reluctant assent. Money smooths most restaurant friction. But Maya shook her head. Not no, but not yet. "If I'm interpreting for you, I don't want to be a prop at your table," she said, voice quiet, hands already in motion. "I'll stand by the wall. I'll come when you want me, but I won't insert myself. This is yours." Evelyn laughed. A breath turned joyful, and signed something mischievous. Maya translated without translating the long history behind the humor. She says, "We can feed you if that's the concern, and if my son tries to put you on a payroll before dessert, tell him to keep his wallet in his pants and his ego in the car." Even in ASL, the cadences were unmistakably maternal. A few tables over, someone choked politely into a napkin. They ate. They argued gently. They recalibrated. They built tiny bridges with butter knives and stubbornness. Twice other diners approached the table to say something aside to the billionaire, then changed their minds when they realized they'd have to insert themselves into an actual conversation and not a picture. Before they left, Maya brought the check, which she had not printed because it would have been too easy to just hand money across paper and pretend the thing was done. She set it down and signed one more thing, to Evelyn, and only to Evelyn, though she spoke softly for the son. "I saw you once," she said in sign, "but not here, not as Mrs. Cole, at St. Gabriel's Clinic in Queens last winter. Your interpreter had been double booked. The nurse asked if you could just write in English like everyone else. You signed to her that you would love to if she would just speak in sign like everyone else." The run of the sentence carried a dry music that made Evelyn's mouth tilt. "I sat with you for an hour. I told you my sister was deaf and stubborn and brave. You told me your son was built out of thunder, and I should not let him scare me. You said you were tired of the kind of people who want to be congratulated for loaves of bread when what you asked for were chairs." Evelyn's eyes widened. She reached across the table and clasped Maya's wrist with the gentlest pressure. Her hand shook now, a tremor that might have been age or feeling or both. She signed slowly, with ceremony. "I remember." "I remember your name sign." She referred to the little designation deaf communities give each other, a shorthand that matches a gesture to a person. Evelyn drew an M against her own cheek, like a dimple appearing when a smile comes. "You earned it then. It fits even more now." The billionaire inhaled like a man stepping into cold water for the first time in a long while. He didn't say "I'm sorry" because apologies used like fire extinguishers create more smoke than relief. He said instead, "How do I make this right?" It was not rhetorical. Evelyn moved her hands with a steadiness that made both of them lean in. She gave him 3 answers. Learn, replace harm with care, and stop outsourcing the part of your life where you are supposed to love people. It was not a grand scene. No violins appeared. Maya brought them a to-go box for what they'd barely touched. She refused a tip from Evelyn twice and then accepted it when the older woman gave her a look that said, "Stop being foolish. It's not money. It's an acknowledgement." The billionaire didn't try to put anything in anyone's pants or cars. He stood to leave. People pretended not to watch again and failed again. He turned toward the shy waitress. His mother, with a ferocity that was almost comedic in its clarity, signed at him to shut up and not ruin a good thing by making it about his solution. He laughed, really laughed, the kind that people who love you can yank out of you with a single glance, and lifted his hands clumsily. "Thank you," he signed, messy as a toddler's first drawing. He looked at his mother, then back at Maya. "I would like the name of a good ASL tutor," he said, voice normal, not the polished public one, "and the truth about what happened at those meetings." The truth took 3 days to find and perhaps 20 minutes to see. It lay in a cardboard box in Evelyn's apartment, 4 spiral notebooks filled with neat, patient handwriting she called signing on paper. It sat in email filters labeled low priority by someone who didn't understand that access was spelled with bodies, not slogans. It hid in a PowerPoint deck where a budget line had been moved from one column to another like a shell game at a county fair. He asked Maya if she would come to the office and interpret one meeting. She said she couldn't. She had a shift and a sister who needed to be picked up from school because the buses had stopped fitting themselves to her. He didn't send an assistant to fix it. He asked for her schedule the following day and offered to pay her at a rate an interpreter would expect, not a restaurant worker. She agreed reluctantly, with a public transit map open on her phone to make sure she could afford the extra time in buses and trains. He thanked her like it was a favor and not a transaction, because it was. They gathered in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor. A CFO, a lawyer, 2 board members, a mother whose hands were sharp as truth, a son trying to unlearn his own reflexes, a waitress whose shy didn't stand a chance in rooms where silence was born of absence. A woman from HR smiled too much. The CFO used the tone professionals use when they see a teenage cashier ring up a pack of gum and decide it proves they know nothing of commerce. It was that precise. He said words like miscommunication and realign and oversight. He lied with sincerity. He claimed Evelyn had signed a document that ceded power to him in matters of foundation operations and resource allocation. He moved papers across the table like talismans. He smiled at Maya with a paternal graciousness that always felt to her like someone patting your head from 6 feet away. Evelyn laughed in his face, not cruelly, just accurately. She signed a sentence where the grammar changed the moral of the story. He used an ASL sign that implied, "I will sign your authority forever." She raised a brow and flicked her wrist, and the meaning crystallized as clearly as rain on a window. Temporary, medical, consent. The document in question, once actually read and not assumed aloud, was exactly that. A limited grant written during a hospital stay 2 years ago to allow decisions about antibiotics when she'd been sedated. It had nothing to do with budgets or meetings or the divine right of men who smelled like expensive cedar to make a grandmother feel like furniture. Maya interpreted with a voice that had been tempered by school administrators, landlords, doctors who didn't look up. She said the words exactly as they belonged to Evelyn, not as the CFO wanted them to sound. She clarified the difference between guardianship and convenience. And then she said one thing without translating because it didn't need translation. It was the sound hands make when you snap them open after pulling a thorn you didn't realize you'd been holding for years. The board members went still. The lawyers stopped moving. The CFO kept talking for a while, and then realized no one with power was listening anymore. It ended with the quiet kind of ending that is both merciful and the only way to peel something you can't salvage away from the rest of your life. He was escorted out not by security, but by the knowledge that he had failed to imagine anyone's mother as anything other than decoration and had built his strategy on that failure. That afternoon, Evelyn asked if she could write a letter to the donors of the foundation that did not read like syrup poured over a burnt pan. She dictated in sign. Maya translated, while an in-house comms specialist finally learned how to spell the names of the people whose experiences they were about to raise money off of. The letter did not say, "Look how noble we are." It said, "We built stairs. Here are the ramps. Please help us build more." The thing about afternoons like that is they are not movies. No one leaves absolved. Adrian wasn't absolved. He took his mother home to an apartment that had too many books stacked on end tables and a plant that had become a tree. He sat on the floor with his back against her couch while she signed, and he tried and failed to keep up. The next morning, he put 2 meetings on the calendar: hire a director of accessible services with the authority to rewrite the policies that had turned his mother into a problem to be managed, and enroll himself in a silent language class, the kind where you don't get to charm your way out of discomfort with a joke. He did not call the shy waitress for 2 weeks. It wasn't contrition. It was respect. He suspected she had enough people who treated her like a switch that could be flipped when the light got too dim. He saw her again on a gray Thursday when he ducked into Laurel and Pine alone because hunger had snuck up on him. Between an investor call and a nap he told himself he'd take and never did. She did not come to his table immediately because she didn't look up at faces for recognition. She looked up when her section asked her to. When she approached, it was with the same steady gait, the same quiet. She signed hello, not because he needed it to understand, but because she needed it to be honest. He signed back, handshapes accurate and timing stiff. She smiled, not indulgent, not pitying, just the kind of smile a coach gives a beginner exactly at the moment they fall and stand up again without making a sound. He asked about her sister. She signed, "This is where I get to talk too fast." He nodded enthusiastically, as if he were fluent. She slowed as if she had always been fluent in patience. Her sister was bold and brilliant, and had recently defended a younger deaf boy on the bus with a ferocity that had resulted in a stern phone call and a private high five. They talked about the austerely delicious lemon tart. He asked if he could buy a pie to take to his mother. She said yes, then surprised him. She signed in a private, almost conspiratorial way, "Bring the tart." "Bring you." In silence. 2 hours. No phone. He showed up late by 5 minutes. His mother counted them with 2 fingers in the air. He accepted the petty justice. He put his phone in the drawer, fingered the watch at his wrist, and turned his hands into a language that made him stupid and humble and happy in the way good beginnings do. Their conversation lurched, and then, miraculously, started to move like a boat that had been unmoored. His mother teased him. He took it. He laughed at himself. He learned. When he left that night for a meeting he couldn't move, his mother signed after him in the doorway, "You are more human like this." He signed back, a little proud, a little boy, trying. News gets out because, of course, it does. Someone saw him at a ASL class on the West Side and posted about it with grainy reverence. Someone else recognized Maya on the Foundation's website under a tab called "Advisors You Should Listen To" and assumed romance, because people love to pretend women's value is measured in proximity to power. She declined the offer to be on a payroll, but accepted a stipend to train staff groups on accessible communication and to audit vendor contracts for captioning and interpreters. She was good at it because she had spent most of her life making things designed for men who talk become usable by everyone else. She never stopped working nights, partly because work keeps the wolves out, and partly because the regulars at Laurel and Pine had learned to find her hands more interesting than anything happening on their screens. There is a very particular satisfaction in watching a table of men in expensive watches sign the word "please" with decent form, because the waitress thanked them and told them that hands that know how to ask are hands that deserve good service. He did not try to turn her into an ornament. He didn't buy her a car or scream at a landlord on her behalf. He did 3 things that built something real. He paid the Foundation's Accessible Services Director more than her male predecessor because he read the numbers and believed them. He funded a scholarship for deaf kids to attend summer camp at a place where the cabins had flashing light alarms and the stars were given names in the hands at night. And he moved his mother's seat at his board table from the silent, polite corner to the place where agendas are set and budgets are fought over and votes matter. He did not do any of this on social media. He did it because his mother did not like to be photographed unless she was holding a baby or a pie. The first time he asked Maya to join him at a Foundation gala, she said no. It wasn't shyness. It was refusal to be anyone's proof of goodness. He learned from the no. At the second gala, he walked on stage, put down his cards, took off the microphone, and signed his speech with a voice interpreter off stage. He stumbled at the word accountability, which made the donors smile a little too much. He restarted, relaxed, and said with his hands, "I used to think that money was a language everyone understood. Then I learned I was speaking over the people I said I loved. My mother asked me to replace harm with care. This is the beginning." And then he said the thing that mattered most. "We are not asking you for charity. We are asking you to stop pretending inclusion is a gift and start telling the truth. You are finally paying for what you should have paid for all along." People clapped like they'd been allowed to breathe. He did not look for her in the crowd while he signed. That was part of the point. But later, as the lights cooled and the dinners cooled and the talkers went home and the staff mopped parquet patterns into something more honest, he found her outside near the loading dock, where the air smelled like rain and fried garlic. She leaned against a railing, hands tucked into her jacket sleeves, the way she did when she wanted to trap warmth. He signed high with one hand, since the other was full of dessert he had stolen for her. She grinned. He offered the plate. It was a lemon tart, of course. He signed badly, slowly, bravely. "Will you teach me how to listen for the rest of my life?" She knew what he was doing. She also knew the thing you had to love was not his money or his efforts, but the feeling you had when you were in a room with him and his mother, and you realized your hands had made a home for both of them. She signed, not for free, with a teasing eyebrow, and then added, "For dinner. Thursdays. No phones." He laughed and signed yes, so enthusiastically he knocked the little silver fork off the plate. It clattered and spun and fell perfectly, handle over handle, onto the concrete. They looked down, then up at each other, and laughed again. It did not become a headline. It became something else. Breakfasts cooked badly on Sundays he was in town, text messages that asked, "Do you need anything?" and meant it, a sister who rolled her eyes at the billionaire until he learned her favorite sign name, mine, and used it for the dog he adopted and trained to be a hearing dog for a woman down the hall who'd been pretending she didn't need one for a decade. It became a habit of chairs arranged in circles, not rows, at the foundation meetings. It became a new line in a budget that made someone in procurement say, "Wow" out loud, and then email 6 people she cared about who couldn't hear that someone with a wallet had learned what volume was for.